Hey, it's Ray. You ever trusted someone so much they could tear your world apart without a second thought? My son warned me, tonight I'm going to take everything from you. And boy, I had no idea how deep the betrayal ran. Not only did he want it all, he stole from me, destroyed what I built, and worse, the will was read aloud, and everything I thought I knew about my own family fell apart. But trust me, this isn't the end. It's only the beginning, and I'm coming for what's mine. The morning light sneaks through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room. Ray's eyes flutter open, the familiar grogginess of waking up after a long night clinging to him. He slowly sits up, the creak of the old bed beneath him almost comforting. He rubs his face, running his hands over the stubble that's grown overnight. The house is still, silent, almost like it's holding its breath. The air smells faintly of old wood and the lingering scent of his late wife's perfume, which never fully left the house. Ray gets up, the floorboards creaking beneath his weight as he moves toward the kitchen. The kettle's already on the counter, waiting for him to fill it with water, something he does without thinking now. His routine is automatic. Wake up, brew coffee, sit in his favorite chair, stare at the photographs on the wall. The pictures are all he has left. Pictures of his wife, his children when they were young, and moments from a time when the house had life in it. There's a quiet sadness in his movements, a kind of mourning that never fully fades. He misses her, but what hurts more is the distance that's grown between him and his family. He was the rock, the one they all leaned on. But now he feels like a stranger in his own home. The silence has become his only companion. His hand wraps around the mug of coffee as he stares out the window, watching the world outside move on without him. He still hasn't gotten used to it. He still hasn't gotten used to the feeling of being irrelevant, of his children no longer needing him, of being seen, but not really seen. He sighs, sipping the warm coffee, and then sets it back on the table. His eyes drift back to the photograph of his wife. I don't know how it all went so wrong, Ray mutters to himself, his voice barely louder than a whisper. But even as the words leave his mouth, he knows the answer. Things changed. His family changed. The warmth that used to fill this house had slowly faded into something cold, something distant. The silence is broken by the ring of the phone. Ray looks at the screen. Clarence, his son. He doesn't answer immediately, staring at the name for a moment longer than he should. He knows this call is coming. It always does. It's the same awkward conversation every time. He picks up the phone and answers. Hello? Hey, Pops? Clarence's voice comes through, casual, but Ray can hear the edge to it. Clarence doesn't waste time with pleasantries. We need to talk. Tonight I'm stealing everything from you. Ray feels his heart stop for a moment. His breath catches. The words hang in the air, heavy with something Ray can't quite place. The pain of betrayal, the shock of it, or just the sheer audacity of what his son is saying. He doesn't know how to respond. He stays silent, letting the words sink in, even as Clarence continues, his tone cold, almost rehearsed. I'm taking it all, Dad. You won't have a dime left, not a damn thing. The words hit harder than anything else. Clarence, his own son, the man he had raised, the one he had given everything for, was telling him he was about to lose it all. And for what? Because of some twisted sense of entitlement? Because Ray had let himself become invisible in his own family's eyes? Clarence. Ray's voice breaks through, but his words feel weak, like they don't even belong to him. Why would you do this? Doesn't matter, Clarence says, his tone flat. I'll take what's mine. You can't stop me. There's a brief silence before he adds, It's over, Dad. Just wait and see. Ray's hand tightens around the phone, his knuckles white. The old man wants to scream, he wants to yell, to fight back, but all that comes out is a dry, defeated laugh. So, this is it? You're really gonna take everything? The line goes silent for a moment, and Ray hears the soft click of Clarence hanging up. Ray stands there for a long time, the phone still in his hand, his mind racing. He's calm on the surface, but deep inside, a storm is raging. His own son. He's not sure whether he's more hurt, angry, or just plain shocked. He stares at the phone for a while, the weight of it sinking in. It's time for him to make a decision. The easy way is to keep quiet, to let it happen, to let himself be swept away like he's been for years. But the harder way, the way that feels right in his gut, is to fight, to stand up for himself, even if it means losing everything. Ray looks around the room, his eyes landing on the photo of his late wife. "I won't go down without a fight," he says, his voice low, steady. There's a spark in his chest, something he hasn't felt in years. He won't let this be the end, not like this. The air inside Ray's house was thick with tension as the family gathered for what was supposed to be a peaceful birthday celebration. The laughter from the living room echoed, but to Ray, it felt hollow, like a mask for something darker lying beneath. He watched his children, his relatives, mingling with each other, their faces wearing smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Ray felt more alone than ever, even surrounded by his own flesh and blood. His gaze shifted from one familiar face to another. He saw the way Clarence's wife, Marie, smiled politely, but Ray could feel the indifference behind it. It wasn't the smile of someone who loved him. It was the smile of someone who was indifferent to his pain. His son, Clarence, on the other hand, had been oddly quiet today. Too quiet. Ray couldn't help but notice how Clarence kept stealing glances at him, his eyes sharp and calculating. It was like a predator sizing up its prey. Ray tried to focus on the party, but his mind kept drifting back to the phone call from last night. Clarence's words echoed in his head. "Tonight I steal everything from you." Ray felt a pang in his chest, the same ache that had been there since his wife passed. His family, his flesh and blood, had turned into strangers. And now, his son was threatening to take everything he had left. He picked up his drink and took a long sip, trying to steady himself. The party wasn't for him. It never had been. Ray was just a spectator in his own home, a silent observer to the family he once held together. His hand trembled slightly as he set the glass down. He was on the edge now, and he knew it. Clarence was going to take it all, his house, his savings, his dignity, and there wasn't a damn thing Ray could do about it, or so he thought. The conversation around him felt like noise, distant and muffled, as if he was no longer a part of it. He heard snippets of the usual family gossip, discussions about assets and plans for the future, but it was all meaningless to Ray. They weren't talking about love or memories or even the birthday they were supposed to be celebrating. They were talking about his money, about how they could take what was his. His eyes drifted to the family portrait hanging on the wall. It was an old picture, one taken when the kids were still young, before everything changed. He looked at the faces frozen in time, remembering a time when there was warmth in the house, when he wasn't just an invisible figure in the background. That warmth was gone now, replaced by cold ambition and greed. He couldn't help but feel the weight of it pressing down on him. The door to the kitchen creaked open, and Ray turned his head to see Clarence standing there. His son walked in, casual as always, but Ray could sense the tension in the room spike. Clarence didn't say anything at first, just stood there, watching him. The silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. "You all right, Dad?" Clarence asked, his voice low, but there was an edge to it that Ray could hear. He knew Clarence well enough to recognize the thinly veiled contempt in his tone. Ray took a deep breath and nodded, keeping his voice steady. "I'm fine, Clarence. Just fine." Clarence didn't look convinced, but he didn't press the issue. Instead, he took a step closer, lowering his voice. "We need to talk about the will tonight," he said, his words dripping with something Ray couldn't quite place. Ray felt a knot form in his stomach. He had hoped the will wouldn't come up today, that somehow they could pretend for just a little while longer, but he knew it was inevitable. Clarence was determined to take what was his. "Everything's already set, Dad," Clarence continued, his words cold, calculated. "You'll see tonight." Ray's heart sank, but he didn't show it. Instead, he stared at his son, feeling the weight of years of sacrifice and disappointment in that one moment. This was his flesh and blood, the son he had raised, and yet here they were, on the brink of something he couldn't even comprehend. "You think you're entitled to it all, don't you?" Ray's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a man who had seen too much, a man who was tired of being pushed around. Clarence didn't flinch. He simply gave a small shrug, a gesture of indifference that sent a chill through Ray. "You'll see, old man. It's not about what's fair, it's about what's mine." Ray felt something stir inside him, a flicker of anger, but also something else, something sharper, more dangerous. He was tired of being treated like a fool, tired of letting them walk all over him. Clarence turned to leave, but Ray's voice stopped him. "You've crossed a line, son." Clarence paused, then glanced back with a smirk. "You'll get over it, Dad. Don't worry, it's not the end of the world." Ray clenched his fist, the old man in him resisting the urge to lash out. But deep down, he knew this was the moment. He couldn't stay silent anymore. He couldn't let his son destroy everything he had worked for. Not this time. The door slammed behind Clarence, and the room fell silent again. Ray stood there, breathing heavily, his mind racing. It was no longer just about money, it was about respect. His family had been taken from him piece by piece, and he wasn't going to let them take the last thing he had left, his dignity. He turned back to the family portrait on the wall, his eyes lingering on the smiling faces of his children. "Not again," he whispered to himself. "Not again." Ray woke early, the dim light of the morning creeping through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room. It had been weeks since Clarence's words haunted him, weeks since that phone call. "Tonight I steal everything from you." Those words reverberated in his head, loud and cruel, every day since he'd heard them. But now, in the stillness of the morning, something was different. The weight of it all, the betrayal, the years of neglect, had built to a breaking point. He stood up slowly, his joints aching, his movements stiff with age. He wasn't the young man he once was, full of energy and ambition. No, time had taken its toll, and yet, as he stood there, he felt something stir inside him, a sense of resolve, of purpose. He couldn't let this go on anymore. Clarence was coming for everything, but Ray wasn't going down without a fight. "I've let too many things slide, too many times," Ray muttered to himself, his voice low but firm. "But not anymore. This is my turn." He walked over to the family portrait on the wall, the one that hung just above the fireplace. It had been taken years ago when the children were young, when life had felt full of promise. His eyes traced the faces frozen in time, Clarence, his wife, his daughter, all of them smiling, oblivious to the storm that would one day tear them apart. The past, with all its warmth, seemed so far away now, replaced by a coldness that ran deep. Ray clenched his fists, feeling the hard edge of the photo frame against his palm. This was it. He was going to fight, not just for his house or his money, but for the respect he'd earned, for the dignity that had been stripped away over the years. He wasn't just an old man, he was Ray, and he wasn't going to let his family tear him apart any longer. Later that day, the family gathered for dinner, a grand event that was supposed to celebrate the family's unity. But Ray could feel the tension, thick and suffocating, hanging in the air. The smiles were forced, the conversation stilted. It was a charade, a performance. Clarence sat at the head of the table, his posture straight, his eyes cold. Ray could feel the subtle weight of his gaze, always watching, always calculating. The dinner felt like a stage, and Ray was the only one who wasn't playing along. He could hear snippets of conversation around him, talk of money, of assets, of future plans. And it was clear to him now. This wasn't a family dinner, it was a transaction. Everyone at this table was here for one thing and one thing only, what they could get from him. Ray's hand tightened around his fork, his jaw clenching as Clarence made his move. The younger man leaned back in his chair, his eyes casually scanning the room before they landed on Ray. "So, Dad," Clarence said, his voice smooth but laced with a veiled malice, "we need to talk about the future. The will, you know." Ray's stomach churned at the mention of the will. He had known this was coming. Clarence had been waiting for the right moment, like a snake waiting to strike. Ray said nothing at first, keeping his gaze steady. He was playing the game now, but he wasn't going to be the pawn anymore. Clarence continued, his voice dripping with subtle threats. "Everything's already set, Dad. You'll see tonight. Don't worry." Ray's frustration boiled just beneath the surface, but he held it in. He wouldn't give Clarence the satisfaction of seeing him react, but in his mind, Ray's thoughts were already spinning. "This isn't about money," he thought. "It's about control, and I won't let him control me anymore." The dinner continued, but the warmth of the food and the chatter of family members felt like a distant hum. Ray was no longer a part of the conversation, just a figure at the edge of it all. He was watching, waiting for the right moment, knowing that soon, very soon, it would be his turn to act. After dinner, Clarence cornered him in the hallway, the space between them charged with unspoken tension. Ray could feel the words bubbling inside him, ready to burst. "You really think you can take everything from me, don't you?" Ray's voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of something sharper. Clarence stood tall, his arms crossed over his chest, a cold smile tugging at his lips. "You don't even know what you've lost already, old man," he said, his words cutting like a knife. "This is bigger than you think." Ray's mind raced as he realized the extent of the manipulation, the lies Clarence had been feeding him all these years. This wasn't just about money. It was about control, about status, about power, and Ray had been blind to it all. "What happened to my family?" "What happened to us?" Ray asked, his voice quieter now, but heavy with years of unanswered questions. "What happened to love?" Clarence didn't answer. He simply smirked and walked away, leaving Ray standing there, alone in the hallway. The anger that had been building in Ray finally broke free. He wasn't going to stand by and let Clarence destroy him. He wasn't going to be a victim anymore. That night, as the house grew silent, Ray made his decision. He wasn't just going to sit by and let this happen. He was going to take control of his life again. He was going to fight for his dignity, for his legacy, and he would start tomorrow. The days passed slowly, each one blending into the next. Ray spent his nights wide awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. He wasn't going to let Clarence win. He couldn't afford to. Every second spent in silence now was a second wasted. A second Clarence used to tighten his grip on everything Ray held dear. But Ray was done waiting. The game had changed, and he was about to make his first move. He hadn't planned on taking the first step so soon, but the realization about the will had struck him harder than any punch. He had lived with the shame of being overlooked by his family for too long, and now the betrayal ran deeper than he'd ever imagined. Clarence wasn't just trying to take his money, he was trying to erase him from the very history of the family, as though Ray had never been a part of it. Ray clenched his fists in the dark, the muscles in his forearms taut with determination. "I've let too many things slide. Too many times. But not anymore," he muttered under his breath. It was the first time in years that he'd said those words, and they felt like a promise to himself. The weight of his father's old watch on his wrist served as a silent reminder of the past, of the legacy Ray had fought so hard to build, the legacy Clarence was now trying to steal. That watch had passed down through generations, a symbol of time, of endurance, and of resilience. It wasn't just an heirloom, it was Ray's bond to everything he had ever worked for. But even as he made his plan, Ray couldn't help but feel the gnawing isolation. The family, once a source of pride, now felt like a foreign land. Dinner time at his house had become nothing more than a battleground, a display of everything that was wrong in the family. His eyes drifted to his children, Clarence in particular, and he saw the quiet malice in his son's gaze. The way Clarence spoke, the subtle barbs that laced his words, Ray knew he was being played. But it was time to stop being the pawn. At the family dinner, the mood was thick with tension. Ray watched as Clarence weaved through the conversations with practiced ease, never looking his father directly in the eye. The rest of the family, oblivious to the storm that was brewing, sat around the table, pretending to enjoy the meal. But Ray could feel it. The distance, the disdain. Clarence's eyes would occasionally flicker toward Ray, as though watching him for any sign of weakness. And Ray could almost hear the ticking of the clock, counting down to the moment when everything would finally change. The conversation drifted to money, to future plans, to assets. Nothing new, but now it was all beginning to take shape in Ray's mind. The cracks were showing. His family's warm words felt insincere, their smiles hollow. It wasn't just a family dinner, it was an act, a performance. Everyone was playing their part, but Ray knew the truth. Clarence wasn't just playing for money. He was playing for control. As the night wore on, Clarence leaned back in his chair, a glint of something sharp in his eyes. He let the silence stretch for a moment before speaking. "So, Dad," he said, his voice as calm as ever, "we really need to talk about the will tonight." Ray's stomach tightened at the mention of it. The will, the thing that had brought all this chaos into his life. He tried to keep his expression neutral, but inside, everything burned. Clarence smiled, his tone mocking. "It's all set. You'll see." There was something about the way he said it that sent a chill down Ray's spine, a threat, thinly veiled beneath the surface. Ray's grip on his glass tightened. He didn't respond immediately, but inside his mind was racing. This isn't about money, he thought. It's about control, and I'm not going to let him take that from me. Not now, not ever. Later that night, after the dinner had ended and the guests had left, Clarence approached Ray in the hallway. The air was thick with unspoken tension. "You're making a mistake, Dad," Clarence said, his voice low. "You really think you can stand in my way? You'll regret it." Ray looked him in the eye, the fire of defiance rising in his chest. "You think you can just take everything from me? You think I'll just roll over?" Clarence smirked, his expression cold. "I've been patient, but patience has its limits. You've been weak, but not anymore. It's over. You'll see." The word stung, but Ray didn't flinch. He was done being a victim. He had been passive for too long, watching as Clarence and the rest of the family slowly chipped away at his dignity, but no more. This was the moment when everything changed. The time for silence was over. Ray was no longer going to stand by and let them control him. He walked past Clarence, his back straight, his mind made up. The first move had been made, and now it was time to set the stage for what was coming next. The next day, as Ray walked through the house, he felt the weight of his decision settle on him. It wasn't just about fighting for his money. It wasn't just about the will. It was about his legacy, his place in the family. He wasn't just going to roll over anymore. He wasn't just going to be the silent old man. Ray thought back to his father, strong, unyielding, a man who had always fought for what was his. He had raised Ray to be the same, to never back down, to always fight. Ray clenched his fists. His father's strength was in his blood, and he wasn't going to let Clarence take it from him. He wasn't going to be a pawn anymore. Ray was going to make sure of that. Ray paced back and forth in the quiet of his living room, his hands trembling with a mix of anticipation and anger. The weight of everything he had been holding inside was finally starting to spill over. He had stayed silent for far too long, letting things slide, watching as his family tore itself apart and Clarence pushed him further out of the picture. The time had come to make a stand. Ray wasn't just fighting for money anymore. This was about respect. It was about his place in this world, his legacy, and his dignity. I've been silent too long. It's time to speak the truth, no matter the cost, he muttered under his breath. The old watch on his wrist, passed down from his father, felt heavier than ever. He looked at it for a moment, as if seeking some sort of reassurance. Time had always been a constant in his life, but now it was slipping away. His family had tried to erase him, to push him into the corner of forgotten things, but Ray wasn't going to stand for it any longer. With a deep breath, he picked up the phone. This was it, the final move. He wasn't going to tiptoe around Clarence or the rest of the family anymore. They needed to know the truth. Ray was no longer the quiet, passive man they could walk over. He was going to take back what was his. Later that evening, Ray called for the family meeting. His heart pounded as he waited for everyone to arrive. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, followed by the murmur of voices. One by one, his children, his relatives, and even Clarence filed into the room. Ray stood at the head of the table, his eyes scanning the faces of the family he had once loved, the family that had now become nothing more than a battlefield. The moment the door closed behind them, Ray spoke. I know what you've all been doing. It's time for the truth to come out. The room fell silent, every eye turning to him. Clarence sat at the far end of the table, his face unreadable. Ray could see the tension in his son's posture, the subtle way he clenched his jaw. I've heard enough of the whispers, Clarence, Ray continued, his voice steady but laced with an edge of fury. You've manipulated the will. You've taken what wasn't yours. You've erased me from this family. The room exploded. Some of the family members reacted with shock, their eyes wide in disbelief. Others, particularly Clarence's allies, shot Ray scornful glares, already dismissing his words. But Ray was done with caring about their reactions. His voice didn't rise in anger, but it carried with an intensity that was impossible to ignore. You want to take everything from me? Ray's words hung in the air, sharp and bitter. Let me show you what you've really taken. The family's reactions were split. Some tried to rally behind Clarence, still loyal to the son they had known for years. Others hesitated, their expressions a mixture of confusion and doubt. But the chaos in the room wasn't just a product of Ray's words, it was the weight of the betrayal finally coming to light. Clarence didn't flinch, but there was a flicker of something that told Ray he had struck a nerve. You're making a scene, Ray, Clarence said, his voice cool, but there was a tremor of something else beneath it. You've always been dramatic. You just can't accept it. Ray felt his pulse quicken. The calmness in Clarence's voice, the subtle deflection, it was all part of the game, but Ray wasn't playing anymore. You've been lying to everyone for years. The truth is out now. He let the words hang there, filling the room with a tension that made the air feel thick. Some of the family members started to whisper among themselves, exchanging looks, trying to piece together what had just been revealed. It was clear that the unity that had once bound them was crumbling. But then, as quickly as the shock had set in, it shifted. Clarence was ready with his response. You're the one causing all this, Ray. You're the one dividing this family. You're bitter, and now you're trying to tear us apart. Ray's chest tightened as he heard those words. It wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. It was about everything. His entire life had been turned upside down by Clarence's lies. And now his own son was trying to turn the tables, painting Ray as the villain in this story. The betrayal wasn't just about money. It was about control, manipulation, and power. Ray stood taller, his voice growing steadier. I'm not the one dividing this family, Clarence. You're the one who's been doing that all along. You've torn us apart piece by piece, and I've had enough. The emotional toll was becoming evident. Some relatives looked uncomfortable, the lies they had believed starting to unravel. Others still sided with Clarence, too blinded by loyalty to see the truth. Ray felt a pang of disappointment, but he pushed it aside. The truth had come out, and he was done pretending it didn't matter. But just as Ray thought he might have made some headway, Clarence made his next move. In a flash, he used his manipulation tactics to turn the family against Ray. "What's he even doing here?" Clarence spat. "All he does is stir up trouble. He's the one who's causing this rift." The words stung, and Ray could feel the weight of the shift in the room. It wasn't just about inheritance. It wasn't just about the will. It was about the family's loyalty, their trust in him, and that trust was slipping away like sand through his fingers. Ray's heart sank, but he wouldn't back down. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice low but resolute. "You can try to turn them against me, Clarence, but you'll never erase me." The battle was far from over. Ray knew this was just the beginning. He had only taken the first step, but now it was time for the real fight. His father's letter had given him the clarity he needed, the strength to push forward, and he wasn't going to stop until he took back what was his. "This isn't just about money," Ray muttered to himself, the words a mantra in his mind. "This is about taking back everything I've lost."